Hello there. It is time to set aside all the worries, all the noise of the long day. Find a position that feels truly comfortable for you. Feel the softness of your pillow and the gentle support beneath your back. Now, take a deep, slow breath in. Hold it for a moment and breathe out very slowly, letting all the tension drift away with your breath. Imagine you are standing before the sea at night. The world is quiet. There is only the silver moonlight stretching across the dark water and the sound of the waves. It is rhythmic and steady, like the deep breathing of the ocean itself. Each wave is soothing you, gently carrying you back into the past. You are drifting back to an ancient time where great mysteries still sleep soundly in the deep abyss. Let your entire body relax. Allow your mind to float effortlessly with the current and listen to the tale of a lost legend, the story of Atlantis. Do you believe that the greatest mystery in human history, the city of Atlantis, truly sank to the bottom of the sea, as rumored the ancient civilization of Atlantis, the legendary island, where humans lived in peace, wealth, and possessed technology thousands of years ahead of their time? According to the philosopher Plato, it was a kingdom of wise kings, where precious metals shone brightly through the streets, temples were covered in gold and silver, and the ocean embraced a brilliant civilization. The people of Atlantis began to believe that they were equal to the gods. And when greed overwhelmed reason, the fury of nature answered. One stormy night, the ground shook, the sea roared, and Atlantis, along with all its light, sank to the bottom of the ocean. From then on, for thousands of years, Atlantis became a symbol of human limits, that no civilization, no matter how mighty, can exist if it loses its humility before nature and the supreme power. Today, people still search for the ruins of Atlantis, not only to prove it once existed, but also to answer a larger question. Are we a more modern civilization walking on the same path as them? And today, let us unveil the mystery of the collapse of the Atlantis Empire. If there is a story that is both philosophical and haunting like a forgotten dream, it is the story of Atlantis. A mighty kingdom swallowed by the ocean in just one day and night. It sounds like a myth, but it was recorded in the voice of a serious philosopher, not a poet, not a folklorist, but Plato, the man who laid the foundation for Western thought. And perhaps because of that, the legend of Atlantis never dies. Around the year 360 BC, Plato wrote two famous philosophical dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. In them, he recounted that more than 9,000 years before his time, there was a giant island located outside the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Gibraltar area today. That island was the center of a great empire, wealthy, proficient in science, and blessed by the gods. Their first ruler was Poseidon, the god of the sea. From that god, Atlantis was seen as a kingdom of the sea and wisdom, where people lived in harmony, possessed morality, and understood the laws of nature better than any other nation. Plato did not write Atlantis to tell a fairy tale. In his every word, it is a lesson about morality and power. He described the city as having a concentric circle shape, with the palace and temple of Poseidon in the middle, surrounded by water channels and walls made of silver, gold, and precious alloys. He spoke of an ideal society where kings were educated in knowledge and philosophy. But then, over time, the Atlanteans became arrogant. They forgot the teachings of the gods, turned their backs on virtue, and sought to conquer the outside world. A notable historical fact, Plato asserted that he did not invent this story himself. It was passed down from Solon, the Greek lawmaker, who once traveled to Egypt and heard the priests in the city of Sais tell of a mighty empire that vanished into the sea. According to them, Atlantis once tried to invade Athens, but was defeated, and afterward, the gods caused the entire island to sink to the seafloor in just one day and night. For the Greeks, this was a bold idea. Another civilization, more ancient and even more powerful than Athens, had once existed and then disappeared. But Plato did not stop there. He used Atlantis as a reflecting mirror. In Critias, he wrote, "When humans became full of power and forgot the divine part in their souls, destruction would arrive." That sentence, through thousands of years, is still like an echo from the bottom of the ocean, a warning from the past sent to the future. A strange and rarely mentioned detail, Plato's Critias manuscript stops midway, right before describing the scene of the collapse. He never finished it. Many scholars think he passed away before finishing writing. Others believe he intentionally left the story open as a metaphor for the unknowable, like Atlantis itself existing on the boundary between history and myth. After Plato, the story of Atlantis spread throughout the ancient world. The historians Pliny the Elder and Strabo both mentioned it as a faint memory of sunken lands. In Roman times, people thought that earthquakes and volcanoes in the Mediterranean were the last breaths of Atlantis. In Egypt, many priests viewed the story as proof that all civilizations, no matter how great, are only temporary before nature. In the book The History of Atlantis, Lewis Spence, one of the scholars of the early 20th century who spent his whole life researching this legend, suggested that Plato might have based it on a collective memory of a real disaster, possibly the volcanic eruption of Thera Santorini, which destroyed the Minoan civilization. What remained in human memory over millennia turned into the legend of Atlantis. Spence wrote that Plato did not create Atlantis as a fable, he revived a dead memory. And that is what makes this story become special. It is not just a legend, but a question. If Atlantis once existed, where is it? If not, why have humans, for thousands of years, never ceased searching for it under the sea, in texts, and even in their own eternal aspirations? Perhaps because within each of us, there still exists a tiny Atlantis, a place where we believe we can touch perfection until the rough waves of arrogance drown it all. When Plato ended his narrative, he left a haunting image, the ocean covering the land that was once the center of the world. And since then, history and myth have merged into one. Every wave lapping against the shore seems to still whisper to humanity, "Remember Atlantis." If Atlantis is just fiction, then it is the strangest fiction in history. Because rarely is an imaginary civilization described with such chilling detail, from geography, architecture, and irrigation systems to laws and rituals. In Plato's account, and later expanded by Lewis Spence in the History of Atlantis, Atlantis was not just a kingdom, but a complete world where humans and gods once lived together. According to legend, when Poseidon, the god of the sea, fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito, he built a private island to protect her. With his power, Poseidon created concentric circles of land and water, with his palace at the center. From that love, 5 pairs of twins were born, 10 kings, ruling 10 regions of the Atlantis Empire, with the eldest son Atlas given supreme power. It was his name that became the name of the island, and later, of the entire ocean surrounding it, the Atlantic Ocean. A notable fact in Critias, Plato described the central city as having 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, connected by giant bridges and canals leading to the sea. In the middle was the Temple of Poseidon, built of gold, silver, and red stone, the temple roof covered in shining bronze. Inside the temple was a giant statue of the god, so tall his head touched the roof, riding a chariot pulled by 6 horses, a symbol of strength and the sea. Lewis Spence, in his research, argued that such a description could not just be imagination. He linked it to similar structures in Egypt and the island of Crete, where the Minoans built the Knossos Palace with a complex system of underground water pipes, drains, and cisterns, exactly like the description of Atlantean engineering. He argued that if Plato borrowed imagery from reality, then perhaps Atlantis was an idealized version of a civilization that truly existed, a place where technical wisdom and art reached a peak even before Egypt. The Atlanteans were described as masters of the sea. They built giant ships, controlled by triangular sails and advanced rudders, conquering neighboring continents, establishing trade ports everywhere. They mined crystal energy orichalcum, a mystical metal only slightly less valuable than gold, which could absorb energy from the sun and glow in the night. A rarely known detail Spence recorded that according to some ancient manuscripts, the Atlanteans possessed sound wave collection technology to transmit information, something we today call resonant sound. If true, that means they once had an understanding of acoustic physics at a level far beyond their time. Although science has not proven it, many 20th century occultists, like Edgar Cayce, believed that Atlanteans used giant crystal energy to create wireless electricity, an idea that, ironically, Nikola Tesla would pursue thousands of years later. The Atlantis Empire, according to Plato, was so rich that the earth could not contain all the treasure. They had fertile fields, precious timber forests, domesticated animals, and endless resources. But what made them different was not wealth, but organizational thinking. They divided the land into regions. Each region had its own king, but was under the supervision of the Council of 10, headed by Atlas. This council met every year, sent people to offer sacrifices to Poseidon, and maintained ancient laws. Those laws were carved on a pillar of orichalcum, placed in the middle of the temple square, clearly stating commandments about honesty, harmony, and respect for nature. Spence remarked that it was the earliest model of a sacred constitution, combining law and faith. And perhaps it was precisely that which helped Atlantis reach a rare balance between material and spiritual, between technology and nature. From the center of the kingdom, the Atlanteans expanded across the ocean. They set foot in Egypt, North Africa, and even the region that later became the Americas. The Mayan and Incan legends about people coming from the sea, bringing fire and knowledge, seem to evoke distant memories of them. But in the golden light of prosperity, a small crack formed. Plato once wrote, "They had everything except humility." And that was the beginning of the fracture when humans started to view themselves as equal to the gods. At the end of the Golden Age, the Atlanteans believed there was nothing they could not do. Move mountains, part seawater, control the weather. But like every great civilization in history, the moment they declared themselves the center of the world was also when the wheel of destiny began to turn backward. The sea, the god they worshipped, remained silent, as if waiting for a day to reclaim what belonged to it. At its peak, Atlantis was not just an island, it was the heart of the ancient world. From the white stone harbors radiated thousands of ships, carrying goods, culture, and political influence across the oceans. The Atlanteans became the rulers of the seas, mentioned by every other civilization with a mix of respect and fear. According to records in the history of Atlantis, Lewis Spence described this golden era as a series of centuries without war, without famine, without disease. Across the territory, the people lived in peace under the rule of the Council of Ten, where kings discussed not with swords, but with knowledge. Every decision began with a sacrifice ceremony to Poseidon, as a pledge that all their actions must be for the balance of nature. A notable fact, ancient Greek documents describe Atlanteans as having superior construction and maritime skills, able to travel from one island to another in just a few days, something that was extraordinary for that era. They erected giant structures with stone-fitting techniques precise to the millimeter without using mortar. Some modern archaeologists have pointed out the strange similarity between this architecture and the Egyptian pyramids, the temples at Tiahuanaco, South America, and Stonehenge, as if a common hand laid the foundation for them all. The Atlanteans were also said to be outstanding scientists and astronomers. They divided the calendar according to the cycles of Venus and Mars, measuring time by the oscillation of orichalcum crystals. Their temples and towers were arranged according to the direction of the rising and setting sun, like a giant celestial observation network. Lewis Spence wrote that if Egypt was the school of souls, then Atlantis was the university of the stars. A detail few people know. Spent cities from ancient Egyptian texts suggests that the Atlanteans understood the laws of magnetic energy, using resonant stone pillars to transmit energy throughout the city. Those stone slabs absorbed solar energy during the day and glowed at night, illuminating the whole city without fire. In the imagination of many occultists, that was the primitive form of wireless electrical technology, an idea that thousands of years later, Nikola Tesla would try to recreate. From the center of the island, a canal system hundreds of kilometers long radiated in 4 directions, leading water from the mountains down to the plains, irrigating fertile fields. Floating gardens, similar to the chinampas in Tenochtitlan later on, provided food year-round. Atlantean farmers grew grains, fruits, medicinal plants, and rare herbs that they believed were gifts from Poseidon. Not only developing materially, Atlantis was also the cradle of philosophy and art. The people learned music, poetry, and philosophy about harmony. They believed that sound could heal the soul, and every city had an echo temple where musicians harmonized with the sound of waves, creating an eternal symphony between humans and the ocean. Poets and scholars of that time were honored like priests because they kept the heartbeat of Poseidon through lyrics and words. Lewis Spence once called this period the balance of the world. Everything was in its right place. Science served morality, power served wisdom, and humans respected their limits. But it was also within that perfection that the seeds of arrogance sprouted. A story passed down from an ancient manuscript in Egypt tells that when light shines on one spot for too long, darkness will form right beside it. The Atlanteans began to believe they were the chosen people, children of the sea, holders of creation's secrets. They expanded trade, then conquered. The fleets no longer carried just goods, but carried armies and power. Neighboring lands from Libya, Egypt to ancient Greece gradually fell under their influence. Plato recounted that the Atlanteans once held power over most of the continent and the islands around the Mediterranean Sea. Spence remarked, "If that is true, then Atlantis might be the first empire of humanity, both a creator and a ruler." A rare detail, Spence noted that King Atlas once had a sea wall, built a giant structure surrounding the island to resist storms. But centuries later, it became a symbol of separation. The Atlanteans viewed the ocean no longer as a friend, but as a border protecting them from the rest of the world. And that was the moment their spirit began to change direction from expanding understanding to protecting power. The Golden Era, like every other brilliant period in human history, did not last forever. When they thought they had surpassed the control of nature, nature began to react. Strange winds blew from the south. The sea surface changed color. On full moon nights, the orichalcum light on Poseidon's temple flickered unusually, like a warning that no one understood. And then, amidst the music and radiant golden light, the empire of the sea began to enter a stage that no one wanted to admit complacency. No empire collapses in a night. Atlantis was the same. It started with small changes, almost invisible like an underground current smoldering beneath the ocean floor, just waiting for a chance to surge. The Atlanteans, once seen as wise and pure, had now learned to look at the world through the eyes of conquerors. And when faith turned into ambition, when knowledge turned into weapons, Poseidon's light gradually turned to the color of arrogance. According to records in the history of Atlantis, Lewis Spence described this phase as the dark reflection of the Golden Age. The empire was still brilliant, but the spirit had changed. The councils no longer discussed morality and astronomy, but taxes, war spoils, and power. The aristocratic class descendants of the first kings began to separate themselves from the common people. They built mansions, held parties all night, and despised the ancient rituals their ancestors once revered. A fact described by Plato in Critias the Atlanteans, after expanding their territory as far as Egypt and ancient Italy, decided to attack Athens, a small but resilient land. They wanted to turn Athens into a colony, but failed miserably. That was the first victory and the last of mankind against the Sea Empire. According to Plato, this very defeat was the final straw that caused the gods to meet and punish the arrogance of Atlantis. Spence offered a different perspective. He argued that this was not just a moral issue, but a natural consequence of social imbalance. As resources ran low, the aristocracy continued to live in luxury, while the commoners had to work double to maintain the giant structures. People began to doubt the god Poseidon if he truly blessed them. Why was the sea rising and the wind changing direction? A detail few people know in the tablets that Spence cited from ancient Egyptian texts. There is a mention of people from the far sea, hair bright as copper, carrying fire in their hands and lightning in their eyes. Some scholars think this is the Egyptian description of the Atlantean people, but also a sign of corruption they had become, those who bring war. In the center of Atlantis, the temple of Poseidon, once echoing with prayers, was now only a place for formal rituals. The priests were bribed, the gods' teachings were distorted to serve political interests. They erected statues of the god in solid gold, hung full of gemstones, and believed that the more offerings, the more pleased the god would be. But what Poseidon once wanted was not gold, but the balance between humans and nature. One day, in Spence's records, a strange phenomenon occurred. The orichalcum light in the temple was extinguished for 7 straight days. The scientists of Atlantis, those who believed they understood every law, could not explain it. They thought it was just an energy malfunction. But for the elders and the ancient priests, it was the first omen Poseidon was turning his back. From then on, signs of cracks appeared continuously. The ground cracked underfoot, sea waves rose higher than normal. Small earthquakes occurred in the southern region of the island, but no one cared. In the court, King Atlas, the 20th generation descendant of Poseidon, still believed his empire was solid as rock amidst the sea. He ordered more sea walls built, the palace expanded, and festivals organized to thank the gods with rituals of human sacrifice, a custom unprecedented in Atlantis history. A notable scientific fact in the 20th century, geologists once found traces of a large-scale geological subsidence in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, believed to have occurred around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the time Plato said Atlantis was destroyed. Although there is no absolute proof, many believe that very tectonic upheaval contributed to creating this legend. Spence went further. He believed the collapse did not come only from nature, but from the energy the Atlanteans created. In a remarkable passage, he wrote, "They learned to control the Earth's energy. but did not understand that every stream of energy has a limit. When greed exceeds balance, nature will protect itself. That sentence sounds like a prophecy for all of humanity today. For in the image of the Atlanteans, we see the shadow of ourselves, those busy exploiting power while forgetting its price. And then, during a meeting of the Council of Ten, when the kings were discussing expanding territory to the other side of the ocean, the ground shook. The stone pillars in Poseidon's temple cracked open. The orichalcum light flared up, then abruptly went out. In the sky, astronomers saw 3 stars shining brighter than usual, a constellation they called the Eye of the Sea. No one understood its meaning, but the priests trembled and said, "When the Eye of the Sea opens, the water will return to its father." No one believed, no one stopped. Atlantis continued to sing, celebrate, build until the ground beneath their feet began to breathe heavily. And the ocean, patient for centuries, was gradually waking up. The final night of Atlantis, people say, began not with thunder, but with a strange silence. The sea surface was flat as a mirror, no wind, no waves, and not a single bird sound. The torches on the ramparts burned brighter than usual, reflecting red light onto the black sky as if the ocean was holding its breath before its own fury. In the central palace, the priests of Poseidon had gathered around the temple, offering the final sacrifices: water, salt, and orichalcum stone. They begged the god to forgive their people, but according to the history of Atlantis, Poseidon no longer heard them. A giant power was rising from the bowels of the earth, the energy that humans had awakened for centuries without knowing how to restrain. Lewis Spence described that event as a chain of serial disasters. Violent seismic shocks, volcanic eruptions, and then giant tsunamis arriving from 4 directions. Earth and water, he wrote, exchanged places. The cliffs were torn in 2, palaces tilted, the golden walls of Poseidon's temple cracked, collapsed, creating a sound like exploding thunder. A notable fact many modern geologists, including J. Harlan Bretz and Jacques Cousteau, once noticed strange sediment layers in the Atlantic, containing traces of a massive landslide about 11,000 years ago, matching the time Plato described. Although it cannot prove it was Atlantis, that coincidence makes many believe a real civilization was indeed swallowed by the sea. When the first tremors occurred, the people of Atlantis ran out to the squares, seeing the sea receding. Children cheered, seeing the seabed revealed, but the priests knew it only meant something terrible was coming. From afar, a wall of water hundreds of meters high rose up, swallowing the sky, reflecting the firelight from erupting volcanoes. That scene, if anyone survived to tell, it must have looked like the world collapsing in a single breath. The Atlanteans ran to the temple of Poseidon, the place considered safest. They believed the god would save them, as he had once protected their ancestors from the first storm. But when they knelt down, the ground beneath their feet shattered. A giant crevice opened wide in the middle of the square, swallowing the entire temple, dragging along thousands of people. The prophets screamed, "The sea is taking back its blood." a detail rarely mentioned quoted from a note Spence found in an ancient Arabic text. Columns of blue light rose from the middle of the sea before the island sank. Perhaps that was the light emitted from the orichalcum crystal energy when destroyed giant energy beams shooting into the sky, burning the air, making the sky shine as bright as day. Atlantis's doomsday took place in a light so brilliant it was blinding the final beauty before sinking into darkness. Plato once wrote that, in just one unfortunate day and night, the entire island of Atlantis disappeared under the sea. That sentence, thought to be just a metaphor, was interpreted by Spence from a geological perspective. A continental collapse similar to the Thera event in Santorini could cause an entire landmass to be pulled down to the ocean floor in just a few hours. As the seawater swept through, the giant ships of Atlantis were submerged like blades of grass. From above, if anyone could still see, they would surely see a giant vortex. In the middle was the blue light from the energy core, the thing that once nourished the whole kingdom, now turning into a hole, sucking everything into darkness. People say that in the final moment, King Atlas stood on the palace balcony, looking toward the horizon. He did not run away. He placed his hand on his chest, looked at the wave flooding in, and said, "Poseidon, if you still love your child, keep the soul of this nation within the water." Then the sea swallowed it all. A strange detail Spence noted after thousands of years. Fishermen around the Azores and Canary regions still tell each other the story of sounds from the seabed, music like from brass pipes echoing up in the quiet night. They believe that is the song of Atlantis, still echoing somewhere deep in the ocean. After Poseidon's anger, there was only sea foam and silence. The ocean closed up as if nothing had ever been there. But the memory of that golden empire could not be buried, because in every civilization afterward, Egypt, Maya, Greece, there appeared the silhouette of an old memory of a people who once reached the peak, then destroyed themselves because they believed they were gods. And when the final waves dissolved, it seemed the sea whispered softly like a eulogy for the world. They forgot that I am the beginning and the end. After the ocean closed over the corpse of an empire, people thought that story would vanish forever along with the sea foam. But as Lewis Spence wrote in The History of Atlantis, nothing truly disappears under the water, it only changes form. And indeed, the memory of Atlantis did not die. It flowed through the blood vessels of humanity, hiding in the myths, religions, and art of dozens of civilizations thereafter. A notable fact, many 19th century Egyptologists noticed that in ancient texts at the Temple of Sais, where Solon once heard the story of Atlantis, there were records of the western land swallowed by the sea, where the sun extinguished in blood. The Egyptian priests called it Ahamenptah, meaning land of the first people. They believed that the very survivors from there came to the Nile Basin, bringing with them knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and religious rituals. Lewis Spence also emphasized an interesting point: the gods of Egypt, like Osiris, Isis, both had strange origins, not belonging to the desert, but belonging to the sea. The symbols of fish, water, and lotus flowers repeated in every temple like a trace of memory about those who came from the water. Similarly, in the Americas, the Maya told of the father of the sea, Itzamna, the god who came from the east, taught them how to measure time, build pyramids, and observe the stars. Incan stories in the Andes region also spoke of Viracocha, who stepped out from the ocean when the sky turned dark. Although different in name, both described a tall figure with bright hair, carrying knowledge and image amazingly coincident with the Greek description of Atlantis residents. A rarely known detail in the collection of Mayan Chilambalam manuscripts. There is a passage about the sunken land where the sun sets, where my old teachers were swallowed. Spence thought this could be a distorted memory of the same global disaster that Plato described. The Greeks later also kept that fragment of memory in their legends. The Titan Atlas, the god shouldering the whole sky, was considered the son of Poseidon, the ruler of the land located amidst the sea. The name Atlantis not only bears the meaning of a place name, but is also a symbol for power paid for by solitude. Spence, with anthropological thinking, suggested that the survivors from Atlantis, though few, drifted to many different lands, becoming seeds of civilization. He cited the similarity between the Giza pyramids and the Kukulkan temple at Chichen Itza, both based on stepped architecture and extremely precise astronomical calculations. According to Spence, that cannot just be coincidence. If two peoples separated by an ocean both look up at the sky using the same geometric language, they must have once shared a common memory. In Celtic legends in Europe, people tell of High Brazil, a mythical island located west of Ireland. Only appearing once in 7 years, then sinking back into the sea. Fishermen in the Middle Ages swore they saw it in the mist, with silver towers and brilliant reflecting light. Perhaps that was just a reflection of imagination or a ghost of Atlantis drifting in the memory of the sea. Another strange detail 16th century Spanish explorers once heard the Aztecs tell that their ancestors came from the saltwater region in the east. They called that region Aztlan, the place of origin of their people. The words Aztlan and Atlantis sound very different, but both have roots in the same concept, land amidst water. Could it be that the Atlanteans truly left footprints in American legends? Although no physical evidence remains, that memory still spreads like a spiritual genetic code. In every culture, people tell it by different names, in different languages, but the meaning is the same. A perfect place once existed. Humans lost it. And since then, humanity has forever searched for the way back. Lewis Spence wrote that stories of lost paradise from the Garden of Eden of the Jews, Avalon of the British, Shambhala of the Tibetans are all reflections of Atlantis in the collective consciousness of humanity. Maybe that empire truly sank, but the concept of it has drifted through thousands of years, like an island of memory that we have never ceased looking toward. In the depths of the ocean, perhaps there still remain stones of the lost city covered in coral, silent and cold. But in the human mind, Atlantis has never fallen into oblivion. Because sometimes the truest things do not lie in the soil, but in belief. Since Plato wrote the two dialogues Timaeus and Critias, more than 2,000 years have passed, but that question still has no answer. Is Atlantis real or not? The story thought to be just, philosophy has become the longest hunt in human history, where explorers, scientists, and even dreamers together venture into the darkness of the ocean, searching for a lost city. Lewis Spence, in The History of Atlantis, called this the world's most enduring legend because it always transforms according to the era. In the 16th century, people believed Atlantis was the New World, that Columbus had just discovered that America was not new, but ruins of the ancient empire. By the 19th century, when geological science was born, explorers turned their eyes to the deep ocean, believing that under those waves, human history lay sleeping, waiting to be awakened. In 1882, an American politician named Ignatius Donnelly published the book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, a work that caused a sensation. Donnelly did not view Atlantis as a myth, but as the source of all civilizations. He believed that Atlanteans migrated around the world after the disaster, creating Egypt, Babylon, Maya, and even Greece. Donnelly wrote, "If Atlantis did not exist, humanity would have to invent it to explain itself." That book, though criticized by academia, sold millions of copies and started the fever of searching for Atlantis spreading across Europe, America, and Russia. A mainstream fact in the early 20th century, researcher Lewis Spence expanded on Donnelly's arguments, but he was more cautious. He argued that Atlantis was not a total myth, but could be a historical memory of a real land submerged by geological upheaval, based on surveys in the Azores, Canary, and North Africa. Spence pointed out geological fault lines matching Plato's description. He wrote, "If the ocean has a memory, it will remember the borders of Atlantis." A detail few people know in 1938 when explorer Jacques Cousteau was still a student. He once said he wanted to find the city of the god Poseidon. 4 decades later, Cousteau dived into the waters of Santorini, where the Thera eruption occurred, and discovered ruins buried under volcanic ash, including house walls, streets, and Minoan pottery. Although not confirming it was Atlantis, Cousteau admitted, if Plato only took inspiration from a real place, then Santorini is the fossilized memory of it. In the 20th century, the hunt for Atlantis not only took place under the sea, but also spread into spirituality. Edgar Cayce, the American prophet, once claimed to have seen Atlantis in his past life dreams. He asserted that this empire was located in the Bimini area, Bahamas today, and that its ruins will rise at the end of the 20th century. In 1968, when divers discovered a giant stone road underwater in Bimini, more than 500 meters long, many believed that prophecy had come true. However, modern scientists remain cautious. They argue that the Bimini Road is just a natural phenomenon formed by fractured limestone. But even if reason denies it, human belief has never been extinguished. A rare and interesting detail in 2001 during a sonar survey in Cuba. The research team of oceanographer Paulina Zalitsky discovered symmetrical stone structures at a depth of more than 600 meters, exactly resembling a city foundation. Data showed the age could be more than 10,000 years. Many immediately called it the Atlantis of the Caribbean, although there is no verified evidence yet. The sonar images, pyramid-shaped rock blocks, and corridors remain one of the most haunting visual proofs in this journey. Lewis Spence once wrote a memorable sentence, "No one searches for Atlantis just to prove it is real. They search to believe that humans were once greater than themselves." And indeed, that search speaks more about us, those looking for meaning in the past. Every time a probe ship dives deeper, every time a new discovery is announced, humans face a larger question if Atlantis truly existed and collapsed because of arrogance and ambition. Are we walking that same path again? Today, with satellite technology and seabed radar, we have mapped almost the entire ocean, but there are still dark areas no one has touched, places where, if Plato was right, Poseidon's city is still sleeping peacefully. Perhaps the answer does not lie in the sand, but in humanity's own imagination. Atlantis still exists not as an island, but as a shared dream of lost perfection. Because there are things, when we cannot yet prove them wrong, they can still be true, at least in the belief of those who continue to look at the sea and ask, can we find the lost paradise again? After thousands of years, the waves still beat regularly on the shore, and in the distant sound of sea wind, that question still echoes, is Atlantis real or not? Perhaps that is no longer important, because sometimes a legend lives long not because it is real, but because it is true. And Atlantis, more than any civilization, is a mirror reflecting humanity itself, brilliant, arrogant, and fragile. In The History of Atlantis, Lewis Spence not only tried to prove the existence of the lost city, he found in its profound anthropological meaning that every civilization operates according to a cycle birth, development reaching a peak, and then self-destruction because of forgetting limits. For Spence, Atlantis was not a geological mystery, but a metaphor for corrupted intellect. A notable fact, modern archaeologists estimate that more than 30 ancient civilizations collapsed due to climate change, war, or resource depletion, including Sumer, Maya, Minoan, and Khmer. Although different in space and time, all share a common point: complacency when humans thought they had conquered nature. The story of Atlantis, therefore, repeats through every century, only changing shape and form. Spence wrote, "Humans always search for the lost paradise, but forget that their own hands erased it." That is the greatest tragedy of Atlantis, and also the tragedy of modern humanity. Today, we have in hand the technologies Atlantis was rumored to have: clean energy, great structures, artificial intelligence, the ability to control weather, exploit the underground and the seabed. But along with that progress is the familiar echo of the past, the imbalance between intellect and compassion. We are moving very fast, sometimes forgetting to ask where we are going. A strange detail Spence recorded in the appendix of the book. The Atlanteans believed that if humans used knowledge to serve personal interests, Poseidon would take back what he had granted. Although just a legend, that commandment sounds like it was written for the 21st century, an era where the sea is rising, forests are disappearing, and the earth begins to shake under human hands. Maybe Plato did not speak of an island at all, but a philosophical prophecy. Atlantis is the image of our future if morality does not go with knowledge. In that way, the lost empire does not lie under the sea, but lies within the very mind of every modern human, where ego and pride are gradually drowning humanity. A rare detail that few know, the French philosopher Jean Delumeau once remarked that every civilization carries within itself an Atlantis memory, a fear of the end, wrapped in myth. Therefore, the fact that we continue to tell this story through thousands of years is an act of keeping humanity awake. Lewis Spence ended his book not with evidence, but with a gentle message. Maybe we will never find the lost city, but if we learn the reason why it was lost, we have found something more important. And indeed, Atlantis does not need to exist underwater to make humanity tremble, because in every storm, in every rising wave, in the lands sinking gradually under the sea today, we all see the image of ourselves again, repeating the ancient cycle that Plato once warned about. Perhaps that is precisely why this legend has never died, because it not only tells of a place that sank, but also tells of us, those still standing on the shore, looking into the sea and wondering if next time, when the waves get angry, will we still stand firm if Atlantis truly exists? Then perhaps it is still living not in the ocean, but in every dream of perfection, in the fear of destruction, and in the hope that we will not repeat their mistake. Therefore, every time you hear the waves crashing on the shore, remember it could be a call from the past, reminding us that the sea always remembers and will always demand back what it once gave. Night falls, the waves still whisper offshore. If you close your eyes, you might hear that sound steady, gentle, but hidden beneath is the ancient heartbeat of the ocean. Some say that within every human there is a tiny Atlantis where we store memories of prosperity, of dreams, and also the fear of loss. More than 2,000 years after Plato told that story, humanity still searches ceaselessly. But perhaps what we really want to find is not the lost city, but a purer version of ourselves before being swallowed by ambition and arrogance. And when we retell this story in quiet late nights amidst the echoing sound of waves, it is no longer a legend. It is the lullaby of history, gentle, sad, and truthful, because in the end, Atlantis never dies. It only changes form from stone and metal into memory and lesson. And as long as humans still remember, still know fear, still know how to love this world, then that empire is still existing right beneath the waves of time.